This is The First Century, a podcast devoted to stories from that influential period of history including Rome, Judea, Christianity, and more. I'm your host, Dr. Brian Schmisek. Get ready to go back in time and enter a world before computers, the stagecoach, the printing press, or even stirrups had been invented for horses. We're about to enter the first century. Episode 36. Gaius Assassinated. Claudius to the throne. Caligula's own short reign eventually ended in CE 41, as he was the first of many emperors to be assassinated. There had been other plots to assassinate him, including the plot of Lepidus, Agrippina, and her sister Julia Livilla. Lepidus, of course, had been executed, and Gaius's sisters had been exiled to the island of Pontus. But given so many plots, one was bound to succeed, and one eventually did. Aware of these previous plots on his life, and on the lookout for others, Gaius learned that the lots of fortune at Antium, a well-respected oracle system whereby people would seek guidance from the goddess Fortuna, warned the princeps to be aware of Cassius. Gaius immediately thought of his former brother-in-law, Lucius Cassius Longinus, consul in 30, and currently proconsul of Asia. We heard about him in episodes 18 and 26. He had been Drusilla's first husband before Gaius broke up that marriage so Drusilla could marry Lepidus. Cassius had an unfortunate tendency to boast that his ancestor, Gaius Cassius Longinus, had been one of those who assassinated Julius Caesar. Since the lots of fortune provided this premonition, the princeps ordered Gaius Cassius Longinus, his former brother-in-law and current proconsul of Asia, to be executed. Gaius apparently never considered that the lots of fortune might have referenced Chaerea, that high-spirited young soldier who supported Germanicus in putting down the mutiny after Augustus's death in 14, and who was now tribune of the Praetorian Guard, serving Germanicus's own son. We spoke about him last week when Chaerea recognized how easy it would be to push the princeps down from a high place where he was taunting and toying with the crowds. Chaerea had a weak, effeminate, high-pitched voice for which Gaius mocked him relentlessly, and Chaerea's family name was Cassius. Indeed, Chaerea had been planning an assassination attempt on the princeps, and was assisted by another tribune, Cornelius Sabinus, as well as other Praetorian officers and some freedmen, even the Praetorian prefect Marcus Aracinus Clemens, who was also bullied by Gaius. Another one of the leaders was Aemilius Regulus, driven by a sense of justice, and another was Municianus Annius, who wanted to avenge his friend Lepidus, who had been killed by Gaius. Together they bided their time, even passing up other opportunities, until the Ludi Palatini, the Palatine Games, which had been founded by Livia after the death of Augustus. The games always began on January 17th, the anniversary of their marriage. At the games, Gaius himself wished to dance and act a tragedy, so he announced 3 more days of entertainment. The games would be extended. Chaerea and his conspirators could endure it no longer. On the 4th day of the games, the crowds were plentiful. Gaius attended, and he was pleased with the shows. He had even invited the senator Asiaticus, whose wife he deflowered at a dinner party, to join him, which the senator did. Gaius delighted in the fall fruits that were thrown to the crowds and which caused the seagulls to go mad. Soon there were multitudes of seagulls fighting with each other and the crowds for the fruits. In the arena itself, pantomime crucifixions with fake blood were also a source of amusement. And as it was becoming late, Gaius said he might go for a bath before dinner and then return to the games. Gaius's uncle Claudius liked the idea, and he went off to the palace on his own. Municianus was afraid that their opportunity to assassinate the princeps might pass them by. So he jumped up to find Chaerea and to confirm the plans, for the Praetorian had already stepped away. But Gaius grabbed his toga and said, "Oh, brave man, where are you going?" Municianus sat down again out of respect for Gaius, but after a few minutes he slipped out. Gaius let the matter go, thinking that Municianus was simply reacting to nature's call. Another one of the conspirators said to Gaius that he thought a bath and dinner before returning was an outstanding idea. For his part, as Correa had excused himself earlier, he was now becoming impatient with the delays. He was perfectly positioned in a passageway between the games and the imperial palace, but he was getting itchy with anticipation. Having decided that today is the day, he wondered about going into the stands and striking Gaius right there in front of everybody. Of course, if that happened, there would be no chance of escape. Bloodshed would quickly come down on him and countless others. But what was taking so long? Just when Correa decided to go into the stands and see for himself, word came that Gaius was on his way. Correa and the other soldiers dispersed the crowds from the passageway, intimating that Gaius was angry, but they simply wanted a quiet place, free of witnesses, to do their deed. As Gaius approached, Correa asked him for the watchword. Gaius gave him another watchword with sexual overtones, and immediately upon hearing it, Correa drew his sword and struck him between the neck and shoulder, hitting the clavicle. The wound was not mortal, and caused Gaius to groan with pain rather than shout out for help, but he was able to stagger away in an attempt to flee before being approached by Cornelius Sabinus, who delivered another blow, thrusting him down upon his knee. At that point, Cornelius encouraged his conspirators to strike as well, and Gaius quickly met his end. With that, the conspirators all fled while they had the chance, rendezvousing at the Palatine house of Germanicus, Gaius's own father. Gaius's bodyguard were quickly enraged and began hunting for the assassins, 3 of whom they killed forthwith, as well as others, some guilty and others not. Claudius had already left, saying that he needed privacy, and he had gone to an apartment, not wishing to be near any danger. Now, rumors were going around that Gaius had been killed, and then other rumors said, no, he was only wounded. The crowds and others were not sure what to do. Should they rejoice at the death of the princeps? What if he was only still alive? That itself would be a death sentence. Was this all a ruse by Gaius himself? Who would have or could have assassinated the emperor? People were asked what they believed, and everyone was careful and circumspect in their replies. The bodyguard and the other soldiers had now surrounded the theater, and they had their swords drawn. Not every soldier understood what had really happened, but they were ready to inflict punishment if that was the order. At this point, one Aruntius went about mourning, though he had hated Gaius with a passion. Still, he called out to the soldiers to lower their weapons, and that Gaius had in fact died. The soldiers began to believe this because Aruntius was such an esteemed figure. Also, they wondered what the Senate might do to them if the Senate took power. So they lowered their weapons, and the crowd was able to make a hasty exit. The Senate had just called a meeting, and now they talked about how to punish the perpetrators. They also began deliberating about what form of government Rome should have. It seemed best to return to the practices of the Republic before there was a princeps. But by now, 41 CE, there was no one alive who had a lived experience of the Republican system, which was effectively and completely ended with Augustus more than 6 decades earlier. Other senators expressed astonishment that the princeps would be assassinated as he was. But Asiaticus Valerius defended the conspiracy, saying that he hadn't killed Gaius, but he wished he had. Asiaticus spoke from the heart and recalled how Gaius had pulled his wife away from dinner at the imperial palace to have his way with her. Upon returning to the dinner, Gaius had mocked Asiaticus's wife for her lack of skills in pleasing the princeps sexually. The entire episode was embarrassing and nearly destroyed their marriage. Asiaticus would have been happy to strike Gaius through with a dagger. While the Senate was debating, Claudius was hiding behind a curtain in his apartment. A soldier was making the rounds and saw Claudius's feet. The soldier pulled away the curtain and found Claudius, and threw himself at his feet, declaring him emperor. He then took Claudius to the other soldiers, who put him on a litter and carried him to the camp. Some who saw this reacted with pity, because they thought Claudius was being carried away to be executed, as Gaius was. But instead, Claudius was kept at the camp. Still, there was a significant faction in the Senate, and among those of the guard that preferred democracy to the whims of an autocrat. Names being floated included Lucius Arruntius Camillus Scribonianus, who was a well-respected senator and had served as consul with Gnaeus Ahenobarbus in 32 after Sejanus's execution. Galba was asked to consider taking the purple, but he declined. Scribonianus, now serving as governor of Dalmatia, was considered to have the temperament and experience to lead, but the Senate could not coalesce behind one candidate. The watchword for the evening became liberty, which in itself inspired many to dream of a future without tyranny. In considering the princeps and the dynastic tendencies that became self-perpetuating, Correa ordered the assassination of Caesonia and her daughter, so that there would be no chance of Gaius's line continuing. Though not all were of the same opinion, Correa entrusted the task to a worthy lieutenant named Lupus. Lupus found Caesonia with her daughter next to the dead body of Gaius. Caesonia was weeping, covered in her dead husband's blood. Upon seeing Lupus approach, she exposed her neck and encouraged him to do his work quickly and not to boggle it up. Lupus dispatched the mother and daughter swiftly, and then made haste to inform Correa. The consuls requested Claudius to come to the Senate house, but Claudius instead sent the message, "I am under constraint and cannot possibly come." While the Senate continued its deliberations, their internal divisions could not be overcome. Some wanted Lucius Annius Vinicianus, others Asiaticus, and still others preferred the governor of Dalmatia, Lucius Arruntius Camillus Scribonianus. With Gaius dead, Herod Agrippa made the funeral arrangements, demonstrating that he was a friend even in death. Furthermore, Claudius benefited from the assistance of Herod Agrippa, who enjoyed close relations with certain members of the Senate. Herod Agrippa lobbied on Claudius's behalf and made the case that Claudius would be a fine princeps. Soon the crowd surrounded the Senate and demanded that Claudius be named emperor. For his part, Claudius, still with the soldiers in the camp, promised them 15,000 sesterces each, and so they swore allegiance to him. Claudius, the drooling misfit, the object of letters years earlier between Augustus and Livia as to what to do with the hapless maladapt, was now emperor. He had survived the reigns of Tiberius and his nephew Gaius only because he was the butt of jokes and underestimated. With Claudius having secured the throne, certain senators and others began to encourage him to dispatch Correa and Lupus. It simply wasn't wise or prudent to have those who assassinated the previous princeps celebrated. So, Claudius ensured that each was sentenced to death. Correa accepted his fate stoically and even offered the executioner the very sword that he had used against Gaius. The executioner made quick work of the deed. The same could not be said for Lupus, however, as he apparently did not stretch out his neck for the executioner, who needed several blows to sever Lupus's head. Claudius allowed Sabinus to live, but having seen the fate of his confederates, Sabinus committed suicide by falling on his sword. Next time, we'll see how Claudius consolidates power and rewards his friends, including Herod Agrippa.